Hi, this is Nicole Rivera, and you're listening to the Stop Writing Alone podcast. One of the things that I have been doing with the Stop Writing Alone community in the paid Substack community is going through the book, The 27 Essential Principles of Story by Daniel Joshua Rubin. I explained this in earlier episodes, but basically it's 27 chapters. Every single chapter has its own lesson in storytelling. And that's what we've been tackling. We're 3 months in now. So we've done the first 3 lessons. And I had this great epiphany over these last 3 months that all of my learning over the years in going after all the various books on writing have come from a space of feeling slightly inadequate as a pantser. And a pantser is some people call a discovery writer, that when I sit down to write long form fiction, I either open a notebook or open my laptop and I just go. I don't have a plot necessarily. I usually have an idea. I think I'm typically an event-driven sort of writer, not necessarily a character-driven writer. I know some people are discovery writers. They start with a character and go from there. I think I mostly do the other thing. Anyway, the thing is, when you write this way, or at least in my experience in writing this way, there often comes a time where stories they lose their way. They lose their way. And so I have been going to distant teachers all over the place, trying to learn how to embed story structure in my brain so that I could be better at crafting that story, not losing my way. And whether I've been admitting it to myself or not, trying to become more of a plotter. One technique that's worked for me is do my first draft and then pull out a plot or a structure that I'm comfortable with and try to apply it to the draft and see, am I hitting the point? Or, one structure that I've discussed a lot in community and here on the podcast is the Save the Cat structure that Jessica Brody wrote about in Save the Cat Writes a Novel based on Blake Snyder's stuff and screenplay writing. So they have 15 beats, and I look at my story and I say, where are the beats? Do I have all 15? What's missing? How can I change this? So I'm always trying to apply a structure at some point in my process. And it works. But something really cool has happened over the last couple of months that I think I've found something that may fit more into my type of writing as I begin, from the beginning. So I've discussed before that one of my favorite writing podcasts is Writing Excuses. I'm behind on everything these days. But while I was away, I was listening to that podcast and going back to last season. So I was in season 16, and they had a whole series on something called the mice quotient. And as they were discussing it, one of the hosts asked the person who was explaining things, but how does this apply to discovery writers? Why do we have to know all the different names of all these different things? Why are we studying story structure if we're discovery writers? And the response was, I just think this can help you not lose your way. This can help you guide yourself through a story. I heard that, and then I've been reading the Rubin book, and I've put these two together, and I have found, I think, 3 sort of North Stars that I can follow while doing my discovery writing that still leave that freedom that I have, that I love when I'm pantsing a novel, when I'm writing and just having fun. I can still have all of that unknown space before me and yet not lose my way. So in case there's anybody else out there that is also a discovery writer, or what we call a pantser, and struggling to get from beginning, middle, and end without getting too far off the beaten path, without making revision an ultimate nightmare for yourself. Because that's, a lot of times what happens with discovery writers is that you write your first draft, you let all hell break loose, and then you've got a lot of work to do in revision. Now, I've fallen in love with the revision process, partially because of this, because I'm still creating over and over again. But I really like this set of, like I said, North Stars as something to have in my writer's toolbox as I go forward. And it begins with the first thing, that mice quotient that I heard on the other podcast. And I will put a link in the show notes so that you can hear the episode, What is the Mice Quotient? Mice is an acronym. It's MICE. Then they did the next 4 episodes, diving deep into the M, the I, the C, and the E. And it's absolutely fantastic. In short, the mice quotient is a set of different types of stories you could be telling. What kind of story are you telling? And I feel like this is the first question that I need to answer for myself when I begin writing. What am I telling? Is it M stands for milieu, a story in which your characters change location, where it's all about stepping into a new space and trying to find their way back. Think Wizard of Oz. That was the big example that they gave, right? That Dorothy steps out of Kansas. She's in Oz. And really, the overarching story is about getting home, right? And we see stories like this over and over again, where a character is taken out of their normal space. And yes, there's lots of different layers, and there's things going on with characters, and there's other things going on, but the big story is getting back. That's milieu. The I in mice stands for inquiry. It's a story that revolves around a question. One big category of stories like this are the mysteries, the whodunits, right? So that the story is all about answering a specific question. Who committed the murder, who stole the thing, all of those types of stories where the question is what the story is about would be under inquiry. The C stands for character stories, and that's really like your character finding themselves. This is huge in YA, right? Many coming of age stories are really like, who am I? That struggle of finding that. And E is the event story, where something big happens and everyone in the story is just trying to get through it. Now, I will just add here, and again, I really encourage you to listen to the original episodes where Marie Robinette goes through this extensively. Like I said, there's about 5 episodes. They're not long, by the way. Every episode in Writing Excuses is about 15 minutes, so it's worth a listen. As she explains, most of our stories, especially if we're talking about long fiction, not short stories, most of our stories have a couple of these things. The example that I feel like I can use most readily here is my YA novel, Girl Unplugged, because you can look at it over on storyhoarder.substack.com. It's not done yet. It's serialized. But this is a YA novel where an event happens and my character is taken out of her normal space. So it's definitely, it has a milieu aspect to it. It has an event aspect to it. It has a character aspect to it. There's a huge character proponent, because really the story is about who is my protagonist. How does she most identify herself as Natalie, the person that she is to her friends? very shy, quiet, reserved, or her online persona, Talia. And in fact, my mentor, when I worked on this novel through Pitch Wars back in, goodness gracious, I think it was 2016, so long ago now, he had said, we could change the title of this book to What Would Talia Do? Because that's so much of what drives the story is my character struggling with how she should show up in the world. So I would say that my story is a character story, but right behind it is an event, and that is this solar storm that affects the planet and takes all of the electricity away from the world. But there's also a milieu aspect because my character is on a school trip away from her home, and because of the event is trapped there, and her classmates are trying to find their way back home. So there's this layering. I love this idea of knowing that going into my discovery writing, that first and foremost, this is a character story, and I'm constantly struggling to decide who is Natalie, who is she Natalie, is she Talia, what's the friendly medium, will she find an answer to that? That is the North Star that I need to be following as I'm writing all of my scenes, all of my stories, beginning, middle, and end. And then there are, certain things that come up with the event. Will the world turn back to normal, or is this the status quo? And then, my milieu. Will the students make it home? There are questions that are implicit in each of those identifications of what kind of story this is, which leads me to my second North Star, which comes from the 27 Essential Principles of Story. So the first 3 lessons, the first 3 chapters of this book really are like a bare bones type of story structure. The first lesson is Drop the Hammer. It's about this event that thrusts your character into story. The second chapter is Ask Dramatic Questions. And the third chapter is about the ending, about exploring the endings. So that Drop the Hammer, I think, really ties in nicely to that mice quotient. That hammer event, as Rubin identifies it, really lets me know what kind of story am I telling. Is there a murder that needs to be solved? Oh, then I have an inquiry story, right? Is this a story about a young adult trying to figure out who they are? Okay, then it's a character story. So this first step of identifying where I am in the mice quotient, I think ties in nicely with the Drop the Hammer. And then that second lesson that Rubin gives us about asking dramatic questions is huge. Absolutely huge. Because what he continues to drive home in the book is that the questions are really simple. Don't make them too profound, too open-ended. He even says at one point, notice that this question asked is only 4 words long. And as I was reading the chapter, I was waiting for him to point out one other very cool thing that I noticed about all of the dramatic questions that he was sharing with us. And that was that they were all yes, no questions. All yes, no questions. Now, I have been writing for a very long time. I understand that my stories ask questions that need to be answered by the conclusion of my story. Like, that is the promise you make with the reader. That is the understood contract. But perhaps because of my teaching background and trying to make like really cool questions all the time, I have been driving to these really intense questions and not bringing them down to simple yes, no questions. A yes, no question is such a cool roadmap to follow when writing a story, even for a discovery writer. I can keep writing about everything that I want to do, but I still have to answer the question of, as the character question, will Natalie ever be comfortable in her own skin? Yes or no? In the event part of my story, will the world ever go back to normal after this catastrophic event? Yes or no? In the milieu part of my story, will the students make it back to Staten Island? Yes or no? Those are the three things that my story has to answer. It could answer other things. We can do all other types of things. But by the end of my story, I need to have answers to those three questions. Okay? So, of course, these are very broad type of questions. Even though they're yes, no, there's lots of different ways we can answer yes. There's lots of different ways we can answer no. And thinking about that yes, no question doesn't make me feel bound in any way as a discovery writer. I can still discover how we're going to get there and still decide on the way if it's yes or no. But I still want to stay on the path of answering these questions. Now, one thing that I have highly, highly resisted as a discovery writer is thinking in any concrete way about the ending before getting really into my story. Because I've done it before where I've thought of a story and I've tried to, plot it all out, and I've thought about all the steps of how we're going to go from A to B to C to D, and this is how it'll end. And then when I went back to write it, it just felt like the story was like, and then this happens, and then this happens. And the life had been sucked out of it. So I've been really resistant to go back and do that. However, in reading this book, again, the 27 Essential Principles of Story, when we got to the chapter about endings, the lesson is called Explore All Endings. And I thought this was really, really neat. Every single story lesson that Rubin shares with us, he also shares a master story that sort of, in his eyes, exemplifies or is a good teaching tool for the lesson. So what he shared for that chapter was HBO's show The Night Of, which I had never seen before, but part of my commitment in reading this book is that I will also engage with all of the stories that Rubin tells us about. So part of my September was watching the 8 episodes of The Night Of, which was fantastic. But the central number one question being asked in The Night Of, the yes-no question was, will Naz be found guilty? Right? So it's a crime that happens, and that's, we're always talking about the night of in the whole episode, in the whole show. And all we're thinking all along is this guy going to be found guilty? And so it sounds like when you say that there's only 2 ways to come about it. But Rubin challenges that. And he says, well, let's sit down and explore all the endings that are possible from the question of will Naz be found guilty. And this is on page 40 of the book, if you have it. So he says, if he's found guilty, there's actually 3 different ways that can happen. A jury finds Naz guilty because he is proven guilty. Or a jury finds Naz guilty, but he might not be guilty, even though he's found guilty. And then the third option is a jury finds Naz guilty, but he's not guilty. He's clearly not guilty. So again, all of these are yes, he's found guilty. It's answering the yes part, but there's nuanced ways that you can do that. Then he goes into the not guilty, and he's got 3 options for that. He says, well, for not guilty, we could say a jury finds Nas not guilty because he is proven not guilty, or a jury finds Nas not guilty, though he might be guilty. And then third, Nas is found not guilty, but he is guilty. So basically the opposite of everything that we just said for guilty. But then he goes even further and says, guess what? Those were the yes options. Those were the no options. But there's even more endings that we can go to that would still answer the question, leave our readers satisfied, but in a less predictable way. So he said, now let's look at some less predictable endings. There's a hung jury and Nas will be retried. Or there's a hung jury and Nas won't be retried. There's also while awaiting trial, Nas is killed in prison. Or Nas escapes prison, runs off, and assumes a new identity. Or the case is thrown out due to police/prosecutorial misconduct. Or it was all a dream caused by Nas being on drugs. So I'm not going to tell you what the ending was just in case you haven't read it. But here's the thing. The very, very neat thing that I find about this is that if I sit down and I explore all the possible endings to my stories in this way, in this really in-depth way, even though I've written down all of them, I haven't selected one. And as a discovery writer, I have the guiding light of I need to answer my yes/no question. And here's all the different ways it can go. It's pretty exciting because as I write my story, as I continue on my pantsing path of discovery, as I go through the story, I will also keep in mind the 6 criteria that Rubin has for a really strong ending, because I love these and I think he's right about them. So he says that in order to have a super strong ending, it's got to be meaningful, inevitable, surprising, just, emotional, and authentic. And if you can check off all 6 of those, then you've got yourself a powerhouse ending. What does he mean by meaningful? It's just gotta, really gut punch you in some way. What was your story all about? You see, this is what I think is so neat. Like I said earlier, I'm the person that's always looking for the deep lesson or question that my story is trying to tell. I can't keep focusing on that while I'm on my discovery path. But when I drive home to this ending, this meaningful bit is where that comes in. What is the more profound question being answered by this storytelling process? That would make my ending most meaningful. Inevitable, I can't be, out in left field. I think the inevitable and the surprising bit is something that we often hear about our endings. And I have heard, and I like this, and oh my goodness, I wish I could remember who said it. I just heard it again recently. That you could be inevitable and not surprising and be forgiven by audiences, but you can't be surprising without an aspect of inevitability, because then that's when you have that unforgivable ending. So, your story needs to lead to this ending, but the surprising bit can either be what actually happens, like those less predictable outcomes for the guilty, not guilty question, or you can have a predictable ending, an inevitable ending, but how you got there is the surprising bit. And that's stuff that you can play with while you're on your discovery writing. His criteria of being a just ending, just and justifiable within the expectations of your genre that you're writing in. He has a really funny aside about like a story that was played on a kid's cartoon channel and then just like that jumps the shark completely, and as you're reading it, you're like, oh my goodness, this is terrible and horrible. Why? Because it's not for what the expectation was of that story. It could be a great thriller story played on HBO, fine, but if you are intending to write a children's story, you better follow through with a children's ending. So our endings must be just within the confines of what it is that we intended to write in the first place. Emotional, if you can get to rock the emotions of your readers, and this doesn't just mean bawling crazy tears. This could be laughing hysterically, feel good, whatever the emotion is, deliver it in this ending. And then the authentic bit is what I really doubled down on in Story Club in the writing exercise this month, because to me, the authentic bit is really the thing that no one can take from us. But I worry that many new writers don't bring it out sometimes. The authentic bit of your ending is that you are the one that wrote this. No one else could have written this. It taps into some part of who you are so deeply that when you read this book, this came from your experiences, your life, your beliefs, whatever it is. I'm going to paraphrase here, but in the book, Rubin says that one of the writers, I believe is the co-writer or co-creator of The Night Of, had said that one of his philosophies or favorite quotes is, if God really hates you, he gives you exactly what you wish for. That's the bit I'm paraphrasing. I might have the quote off, but it basically, that knowing that about that writer makes so much sense for everything that happened in this story and how it ended. And that's the thing, what bit of you is in your story. So this feels like an extremely long episode, an extremely long way to explain a 3-step process that I feel works so well with the way my creative brain works. I'm so excited to jump into NaNoWriMo. I don't even know what writing project I want to do, but I want to put this to the test. I want to start a new long-form fiction story and come out the gate with an idea of where it fits in the mice quotient. Is it a milieu story? Is it an inquiry story? Is it character or event? I'm going to guess, knowing me, it's typically character and event in a little dance, but we'll see. I don't know. I haven't come up with it yet. And then from that, from developing those first bits of my story, getting to know what is the event that's the drop the hammer, as Rubin calls it, that drives my character into story, I can then visualize the yes/no questions that will take me on my path to all of these different endings. The yes, the no, and the unpredictables, and list them all out. And then as I go on my path of writing, decide which of those endings fits best in my story to be meaningful, inevitable, surprising, just, emotional, and authentic. That's it. Those are my 3 steps. That is going to be my new story structure path as a pantser, as a discovery writer for right now. It's my next exploration. It's one of those lessons that feels very very comfortable in my psyche, and whether I want to keep it or not, it's in. This is how I'm going to think now for a while. So I wanted to share it with you just because I know we're getting into that season. We're getting closer to NaNoWriMo. Many people like to do that month, that 30 days of feverish writing in pantser mode, in discovery mode. And I feel like a lot of people come out of the month, come into December with, they had a direction in the beginning, and something went nuts because they were trying to get words. They kept writing. And I feel like this 3-step process might give you something a little bit more reined in by the end. So let me know what you think. Have you heard of the mice quotient? And I should give credit where credit's due. I did say that I heard about it in the Writing Excuses podcast from Marie Robinette, but she did say she learned it from Orson Scott Card many years ago, before she learned about who he really was. She said he was an excellent writing teacher. He does have a book on writing sci-fi and fantasy that is somewhere in this house. My husband and I have no idea where it is right now. And she said that it's in that book as well, although he says mace. She changed the ask, I think it was ask to inquiry. So that's credit where credit's due. Have you heard of either the mace quotient or the mice quotient? Do you use it? Is it something that helps you in your writing? And have you checked out this book yet, The 27 Essential Principles of Story? I mean, we're still on this journey over in Substack. If you want to come to stopwritingalone.substack.com, the paid subscription is just $5 a month, or the bargain, the $50 for the whole year. In October, we'll be going to chapter 4, which I think is going to be shifting gears a little, where the first 3 chapters were 1, 2, 3 and building a story. It sounds like lesson number 4 is connect with therefore and not then, not end. So I think now we're going to be filling in the guts of our stories. That's what's coming up next. We'll be doing that in October. Each month I give a writing exercise that complements the lesson. And we also have a Zoom chat to discuss all of the cool stuff that we learned from it. But if you are doing NaNoWriMo and you're looking for extra support, Happy Campers is starting on Monday. And Happy Campers Club is that, I talked about it all in the last episode, that 2-month intensive of Zoom calls Monday through Friday for goal setting, write-ins, chat. Today, as I'm recording this on Wednesday, we are going to have our casual chat. Thursdays, we'll be talking about things like this story structure and how to apply it to our stories and how to prepare for the big writing in November. And then in November, we'll be adding more write-ins. And every Friday is a writing prompt party. So lots of stuff going on there. I will put the link in the show description for you for that. The price for Happy Campers Club is $449.99. But there is a massive discount for people who are subscribed to the Stop Writing Alone Substack. So that's a little workaround that if you wanted to subscribe, you can see. I basically gave all subscribers the return Happy Campers discount rate. So so that's what's going on. It's about to get real busy in Stop Writing Alone land, and you're invited to join me for the whole journey. Also, if you haven't been over to the NV Rivera YouTube channel, I've been playing massive catch up with my writing prompts this week. So there's been a new writing prompt every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I'm hoping to be caught up by the end of the weekend so that I can go back to just Fridays in October. But for now, if you're looking for writing prompts, look no further than the NV Rivera YouTube channel, or subscribe to Stop Writing Alone on Substack, because I have been sharing every single one over there as well. Okay, I've yammered on long enough. You need to go write or join us or come hang out and see what's going on in the community. Otherwise, I will talk to you again next week, as well as sooner on the YouTube channel, or even sooner if you join me in one of these Zoom calls for the rest of this week. Have a lovely week, just in case you don't hear from me until then. And happy writing. Thank you, as always, for listening.